Okay, so we started now into this part of the sugya. We're talking about Chatzi Shiur. Just a sec. So until now, we didn't discuss Chatzi Shiur. Say we understood Chatzi Shiur to be an issue between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, whether Chatzi Shiur is asur midioraita, asur midorabanan. And as we summarized last time, from the beginning of the Gemara, the main question that we were trying to answer is to understand what the meaning of the word asur in the Mishnah was. Right, so the Mishnah said Yom Kippurim asur b'achila v'shtiya v'rechitza, etc. So we wanted to understand. Mishnah used the word asur. Basically, we want to know what the word means, and we know it means we know it means forbidden, but we want to understand what the halachic definition of forbidden is in this regard. And so, where we answered by saying that asur in this Mishnah really means chatzi shiur. The chatzi shiur is asur b'achila v'shtiya. Chatzi shiur, as we mentioned last time, doesn't seem to apply to the other things. So we dealt with those. We started to deal with those a little bit separately last time. But we understood that asur means what's asur? Chatzi shiur is asur. So chatzi shiur asur. We didn't say exactly why. What we said is that according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Torah forbids chatzi shiur, and according to Reish Lakish, the Torah permits chatzi shiur, and the Rabbanan forbid chatzi shiur. But now we want to understand what's the conceptual basis to their machloket. The only other thing I'll add in is that at the end of the last part of the sugya that we did, we challenged the question, challenged the basis of the question. When the Gemara said, "Kol hecha da'anush kared lo tani asur," meaning, is it true that every time there's a chiyuv karet that the Mishnah does not use the word asur, and then we brought a braita where it's clear that asur can include things that are anush karet, and we gave so what's the point? If asur can include things that are anush karet, then our original question goes away. Now, there's a problem that the Mishnah said asur instead of chiyuv karet, because it said asur, we can understand it as a term, which includes things that are anush karet. And all of this discussion about chatzi shiur, midioraita, midorabanan, we can push that aside and say it doesn't matter. So we ask this question: Is it really true that that every time that the Mishnah uses the word asur, or every time somebody's chayav karet, the Mishnah would not use the word asur? And then we see from the braita, which we understood is an addendum, it's like an explanation to our Mishnah. It says, "Afal pi shamru asur b'kulvan, lo anush karet el ocha v'shotev oseh melacha bilvad." So what do you see from the braita? That this braita, which is explaining our Mishnah, says that asur applies to all of them, but anush karet only applies to ochel, shoteh, and oseh melacha. And so I understand that the fact that achila v'shtiya was listed with other things that are merely asur and not chayav karet, it wasn't a problem. So if we left off here with this question, we didn't have an answer to the question, then effectively we would be saying that I don't understand that the Mishnah is talking about chatzi shiur. It's talking about the regular achila v'shtiya, v'shiur, and a chiyuv. So the Gemara gives two answers, right? So the first answer is to understand the braita in light of the way we understood the Mishnah, right? So just the same way that we said asur in the Mishnah really refers to things that are asur because they're chatzi shiur, and that's why the Mishnah uses the word chatzi asur. So then I read the Braita to understand the Braita in the same way. And the Gemara says, Hachikamar, this is how you read the Braita. Kishamru asur, when they said asur in the Mishnah, lo amru ela b'kachatzi shiur. They only use the term asur to refer to chatzi shiur of al kashi anush karet. But actually, if there was a shiur, then in fact he's anush karet. Pisha anush karet, ein anush karet ela ochel v'shoteh v'osem melacha bilvad. And even though he's anush karet, he would not karet out of that list only the people who eat, drink, or do melacha. So that answers the question. That answers our basic question by saying that we read the Braita in such a way that asur really refers to chatzi shiur. So as we pointed out last time, it's a strained way of understanding the Braita, because I could understand the Braita very easily as it is, and I could understand the Mishnah also in a very straightforward fashion. That when it says Yoma Kippurim asur b'achila v'shtiyah, I can understand based on the Braita now that okay, all of them are asur, and achila v'shtiyah are also anush karet. So now I'll say no, it's all talking about chatzi shiur. But we had a second answer, and the second answer was kiktani asur ashara. So when the Mishnah says asur, it's really only referring to the other things besides achila v'shtiyah. And so why would the Mishnah use the word asur in this to refer to this whole list if only part of the list should be categorized as asur? Why? So, in other words, Gemara wants to answer the question by saying that asur in the Mishnah really only refers to the things in the list after ashtiyah. So then you have a question. So why did it use asur for the whole list if it really only refers to 5 things in the list? I don't know if we talked about this last time. I don't think so, but we did. We did in kind of a roundabout way. But why would that be? Why would it be that the Mishnah would use the word asur for this whole list when it doesn't refer to the whole list?
It'd just be a device for a stylistic device.
Okay, it is a stylistic device, and we'll say a little bit more, that most of the things on the list fall into the category of asur. In other words, they're not anush karet. So since most of the list fits that description, it doesn't bother the Mishnah to include achila v'shtiyah. Now, again, issues according to this second answer. So then, what are we left with? We're left with achila v'shtiyah are in this list that are asur, but really we know that they're anush karet. And then the rest of the list is asur karet. That's what we will understand now from this second answer. And so, what about the understanding that the Mishnah is referring to chatzi shiur? What happened to that?
We don't need that now.
Exactly. We don't need it anymore. In other words, according to this second, this is the straightforward reading of the Mishnah and this little Braita. The straightforward reading of the Mishnah and the Braita is that the Mishnah is not breaking down into this finer point of Chatzi Shiur. The Mishnah is forward. When it says Asur, it refers to, the term Asur is most appropriate for the other 5 Inuyim. But we include in the list Shtia, and they're Anush Karet. So when are they Anush Karet? They're Anush Karet when you eat a shiur or you drink a shiur. So the whole discussion that we had until now about Chatzi Shiur is effectively set. That doesn't mean that the things we learned about shiur are not true. It's just that they're not immediately relevant to our Mishnah. But in terms of the halacha of eating or drinking a Chatzi Shiur on Yom Kippur, or eating or drinking a Chatzi Shiur in other categories of halacha where it's forbidden to eat or drink, all of that discussion is still relevant. But now I'm just reading the Mishnah differently. And then Toch Kedei, we understood as a proof to this last, as a proof to this last answer, we brought a Braita, where the Braita says, Talmud Lomar Shabbaton. I haven't decided if it's Shabbaton Shvut or Shabbaton Shvot, but either way. In other words, either it's a command. Shabbaton means you must desist, or Shabbaton is equal to the rabbinic concept of Shvut, which means that you have to desist from some certain things. So what did we learn out from this Braita? That since the Torah says Shabbaton, by Yom Kippurim, right? So Shabbaton hilachem v'initem et nafshotechem. So we understand Shabbaton is an extra word, because it could have just said Shabbat hilachem. So Shabbaton, the Shabbaton is an extra word, and Chazal understood it to be a basis for further limiting what one is allowed to do on Yom Kippur. And what they understood is, since the context of Shabbaton here is inui nefesh, Shabbaton hilachem v'initem et nafshotechem, so it stands to reason that the Shabbaton, that you should be shvot, that you should desist from other things which would be considered inui nefesh, other things other than eating or drinking. And the Chazal determined that those things are rechitza, sicha, nirata, sandal, tashmita. So, and Rashi explained it a little bit further by explaining that Shabbaton is used in Hilchot Shabbat from a different pasuk, that Shabbaton was used as a basis for limiting things that you're allowed to do on Shabbat that are not included in the category of melacha per se, right? And we looked at the sugya last week that talked about knivat yerek on Yom Kippurim shechaliot b'Shabbat. So the chopping up vegetables on Shabbat that you're not going to use until after Shabbat is asur. It's asur even when Yom Kippur falls out on Shabbat. When Yom Kippur doesn't fall out on Shabbat, then there's a special heter that minchal mala that Chazal allowed you to do that. And we'll come back to that in halacha somewhat later. Okay, so that's where we're up to now. Quick recap from last week. But now I'm going to talk about the nature of Chatzi Shiur. So the Gemara goes on It says Gufa, Chatzi Shiur, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Asur Min HaTorah, Reish Lakish Amar Mutar Min HaTorah. So that much we saw already. But now we're going to see a little bit more. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Asur Min HaTorah, Kevan Dechazu Yitztrufe, Isura Ka'achil. Since fit to be combined, then one is eating something that is now asur. They're eating an isur. Reish Lakish says mutar min Torah. Achila marachmana v'leka. He says no, it's mutar because the Torah forbids eating, and we don't have eating, because eating in all other places in the Torah is defined as being a shiur. So before we go on, so let's just understand. Let's just think about for a moment this malukut. So what is Rabbi Yochanan's argument? What is he saying? Why is it that chatzi shiur must have been forbidden by the Torah? No, you're shaking your head, Michael. You don't have any.
There we go. Yeah, I'm not sure. The fact that it could, he says the fact that it combined, but I'm not exactly sure how he gets from that to Asur.
Okay, so think about it this way. You're not allowed to eat, everybody agrees that you're not allowed to eat a shiur of food on Yom Kippurim. Nobody questions that. So, in order to eat a shiur,
you have to eat a chetzi shiur.
You have to eat a chetzi shiur. In other words, you're not going to start off. You certainly don't have to start off by all at once sticking a kazayit of food in your mouth and eating it up, right? So, in order to eat a shiur, you're going to have to eat less than a shiur. So, Rabbi Yochanan's argument is that, in other words, you never get to a shiur without a chatzi shiur. Chatzi shiur is a necessary component of being chayav karet. So as soon as you, and since whatever you eat, even chatzi shiur, can be mitztaref to a shiur, so the Torah says you're not allowed to eat less than shiur. And then by contrast, Reish Lakish says no. Achila marachmana v'leka. That is, kol zman that you have not eaten a shiur, then the Torah has nothing to say about that. Torah didn't forbid that. The Torah only forbids you to eat a shiur. So I'll point out this machloket it's an interesting conceptual machloket, and I believe there's a parallel conceptually to another machloket between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan about shchita. And the machloket there is Rabbi Yochanan holds yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'ad sof. Shchita as an action goes from beginning to end. I'll explain that a little bit more in a second. And Reish Lakish says, English shchita elo basof. Shchita only at the end. So think about it this way. In order to, a kosher shchita on an animal, on a behemah or chaya, is to cut through most of the kaneh and most of the bed, most of the windpipe and the jugular vein. Once you do that, the animal is shechted. But it's not an instantaneous thing. That is, you have to go part way until you get to the whole way. So the question is, what's the definition of shchita Do I say shchita is only shchita at the end when you've shechted a shiur of the animal, which would be rov kaneh and rov veshet? Or do I say that shchita is a process that goes from the beginning to the end? Now, in shchita, what difference would it make? Because the animal won't be kosher until you get to the end. So the Gemara brings an example. What if you had an animal that you're bringing as a korban, and so the shchita has to be done in the azara. So what if you stand right outside of the azara and you shecht one of the simanim? You shecht, let's say, the kaneh, and then you before a moment passes, you bring the animal into the azara and you shecht the veshet. So you did the beginning of the shchita in a place that's not kosher for the shchita of a korban, but you finished it in the right place. So if you say yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'yad sof, then the korban will be pasul, because even the first siman that you shechted outside of the azara is recognized as being part of the shchita. And that you did in a place that's pasul. And if you say that shchita is only at the end, then granted that you started the shchita in a place that's outside, but for halachic purposes, I'm only concerned where you finished, because the shchita is into shchita until you finish. And actually, a machloka between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan in the Gemara. There are other parallels, but it's in both cases. In other words, back in our case of Chatzi Shiur, I believe it's a conceptual argument, or it's a similar conceptual argument. So when I look at eating, am I only looking at the final result, which is I ate a shiur, I didn't eat a shiur, or do I say that eating is a process? And so I have to look at the entire process. So we'll think about that as we go through. So now the Gemara is going to challenge this, of course. So the Gemara says, Eitive Rabbi Yochanan the Reish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan challenges Reish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan, of course, says Chatzi Shiur is a sur min Torah, and Reish says Chatzi Shiur is mutar min Torah. So he makes the challenge as follows. He says, Ein li ela kol sheshno ba'onesh yeshno ba'azhara. So first I'll just translate it literally. I only have the concept that anything that is included in punishment is included in warning. Koi b'chatzi shiur ho'il ve'eno ba'onesh yachol eno ba'azhara. So a koi and a half a shiur, since they're not included in the category of onesh, that is, there is no chiyuv karet, then I might think that they're also not included in the warning. Talmud lamar kol chelev. So the Torah says, and that's why the Torah says kol chelev, all fat, or you could also translate that as any fat. Okay, so what's this talking about? So there's an Isur in the Torah to eat chelev. Just a second. Okay, I apologize. I lost this page also. Just a second. Moving up the page. Okay, so in Parshat Tzav, we'll skip over the beginning of the parak. It's not immediately relevant. We'll start from Pasuk Chav Bet. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, deber b'nei Yisrael lemor. Kol chelev shor v'chesed v'ez lo tochelu. Any, and here it would make sense to translate it as any chelev of ox or a sheep or a goat, you do not eat. You're not allowed to eat. So right, so the two types of fat in the animal, there's chelev and there's shuman. And they're distinct within the animal. So here the Torah explicitly says chelev is something that you are not a chelev of shor kesef or ez, you're not allowed to eat. The chelev neveira, the chelev treifa yeaseh l'chol melacha. Chelev of either neveira, an animal that died not by shchita, treifa, an animal that died by before its time or by unnatural causes. You can use that for any kind of malacha. You can use it to do stuff with. In other words, in the language of Chazal, it means that it's mutar b'hana'ah. You're allowed to derive benefit from chelev, from a nevera or a treifa, but you're not allowed to eat it. Anyone who eats chelev from an animal that one would bring forth as a sacrifice, to burn as a burnt sacrifice to Hashem, then that soul is cut off, right? The person who eats is cut off from their people. It also says, right? One is also not allowed to eat blood in any of your dwelling places for fowl or for a behema. So similarly, if you eat dam from an oaf or from a behema, then you're chayav karet. Okay. So here the Torah is very explicit about the chelev that one is not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to eat the chelev of a behema from these kinds of animals that you can bring to sacrifice. So that would exclude chaya, right? In other words, the Torah says you're not allowed to eat the chelev of a behema, and we know that the chelev of a behema that bought as a korban is burnt on the mizbeach. It's part of the sacrifice, and the Torah seems to be saying here that's something that you're never allowed to eat, no matter what. And if you wanted to say a little bit more, you could say that, as it were, that's for the mizbeach to eat, not for you. Now, a chaya, a non-domesticated animal, you never bring that as a korban. Chaya is pasul for a korban. So, presumably, you would be allowed to eat the chelev of a chaya. We'll talk about dam in a second also, but you'll notice that for dam, it says la'of v'la'behema. It adds in oaf. Now, oaf is also something that's brought as a sacrifice. We don't have chelev in an oaf. So the Easter of chelev is not immediately pertinent. But you do have dam in the oaf. Okay. So let's see how. Let's go through the way the Gemara is going to understand this. So there's a general rule that Chazal understood when you're trying to figure out things that the Torah forbade and their punishments. That anything that the Torah forbade for which there is a punishment there's always going to be two psukim or two phrases in the Torah. One's going to be the azhara, it's going to be the warning, meaning the Torah is going to tell you, don't do this. And then there'll be another pasuk or another phrase that's going to tell you the punishment if you do that. So here in pasuk Chaf Gimel, it says, Kol chayil shur v'chesed ve'ez lo tochayil. That's the azhara. The Torah is warning you not to eat chaylev. So I understand already from that pasuk that eating chaylev is asur. At that moment, I don't know what the punishment is, or if there's a punishment, but I know that you're not allowed to do it. That's the azhara. And then in pasuk Kafeh, when it says Kikol chelchev min behema she'akriv, etc., there, that's the Torah giving you the punishment. That's the onesh. So here for chaylev behema, I clearly have an azhara, and I have an onesh. Now, what about chatzi shiur? So, chatzi shiur, Rabbi Yochanan holds, chatzi shiur is asur min haTorah, but there's no punishment. You're not anush karet for eating a chatzi shiur of things for which if you ate them, you'd be chayav a chatzi shiur, you'd be chayav karet. So, for example, eating chaylev, we understand if you eat now. So now the way I'll understand this in rabbinic terms, since the Torah says if you eat a shiur of chaylev, you're chayav karet. Fine, I understand that. What if I eat a chatzi shiur? It won't be chayav karet. That's the way we would understand it. But now let's see a little. So what did Rabbi Yochanan say? He says, "Ainli ela kol sheyeshno ba'onesh yeshno ba'azhara." So he says, I'm going to rephrase this a little bit. We're going to start from the premise that anything that is categorized with an onesh also is categorized with an azhara. In other words, anything that the Torah punishes you for, the Torah also gives you an azhara for. That's a general rule. And it's going to be applicable here in the case of chaylev. So then he says, "Koi v'chatzi shiur ho'il ve'eino ba'osh yachol eino ba'azhara." So a koi, we'll talk about a koi in a second, but you might know koi is an animal, and there's a machloket amongst the chachamim about whether it's a safek behema, safek chaya, or whether it's in a category all its own. We'll talk about that in a second. So leave aside, it'll be very important. We'll leave it aside just for a second. Chatzi shiur, let's say chatzi shiur ho'il ve'eino ba'onesh. All right, so we're starting from the premise, anything that the Torah says you're punished for, the Torah also warned you against. So chatzi shiur, the Torah says, we understand the Torah doesn't punish you for chatzi shiur. So yachol eino ba'azhara. So then maybe you would think that the Torah also doesn't give you a warning about eating chatzi shiur. Since there's no onesh, then maybe there was no azhara. Meaning, maybe it's like you, Reish Lakish, maybe the way you want to say that the Torah permits it altogether. But he says, but I have a pasuk that tells me explicitly any chaylev. What's any chaylev? So it's like we saw in the pasuk, kol chaylev shor v'chesed be'ez lo tochaylev. So kol chaylev would imply the Torah is telling you you're not allowed to eat any chaylev. Even what? Even a chatzi shiur. So Rabbi Yochanan says, look, the Torah tells me, here's an example. The Torah says I understand Chatzi Shiur is not a Chiyuv Karet, because Torah is only going to be Mechayev Karet on Achilat Shiur. But, and so then you might think there's no Azhara for eating a Chatzi Shiur. But here, Torah says explicitly, Kol Chelev, not allowed to eat even a Chatzi Shiur. So Reish Lakish answers is Midarabanan. Ukra asmach de ba'alma. He says, no, it's really only an Isur D'Rabanan. And that pasuk of Kol Cherev, that's just an asmach. Because when it says any Chelev, it doesn't necessarily mean any amount. Right? The Kol of Kol Chelev could mean Chelev from any of the animals that we mentioned. For example. Right? She says it's only Midrabanan. So before we go on, now let's talk a little bit about koi. So koi is mentioned in a number of places. Of course, koi is not mentioned in Torah. That's one of the problems. And I had actually just a second. I scanned a picture of what Felix believes to be a koi, but somehow it got lost on my computer. I'm sorry, 1 second. So in a moment, I'll hold it up while this emergency vehicle goes by. So, okay. So a koi, according to Felix, is kebes sabar. It's a wild sheep, and there's a lot of discussion about koi. We don't have to get into all of it. Let's just look for a moment at what the Mishnah mentions about koi specifically in this regard. So in the Mishnah Bikurim, in the 2nd chapter, says koi yeshvo drachim shaveh lechaya v'yeshvo drachim shaveh lebama. Right, there are aspects of the koi which are like a chaya, like a wild animal, and some aspects that are like a domesticated animal. V'yeshvo drachim shaveh lebehema v'lechaya. In some ways, it's like both a chaya and a behema. V'yeshvo drachim she'eno shaveh lo lebehema v'lo lechaya. Right, so it has these different aspects. Ketzad shaveh lechaya. So in what way is it equal to a chaya? Damo ta'un kisui kedam chaya. So there's a mitzvah from the Torah that if you shecht a chaya or an oaf, you have to cover the blood in dirt, right? You have to cover the blood. That's kisui. It's a mitzvah min Torah. That's a mitzvah by a chaya and not by behemah. Why is there a difference? So you could say, again, because it is not a korban that's brought on the mizbeach, but you have to treat the blood, with that respect, and you have to bury the blood. Whereas in principle, the behemah could have been brought as a korban, in which case the blood would be sprinkled on the mizbeach. Just a quick idea, but we don't have to go into it. Okay, but a koi is like a chaya because it needs kisui adam. Bein shochtin oto b'yom tov, and you don't shecht it on yom tov. V'im shchato ein mechasinato. Right, so you may have learned in Masechet Beitzah this question of shechting on yom tov. There's a problem to shechte on yom tov because you don't dig the dirt to cover the blood, so you would refrain from shechting a chaya on Yom Tov. So here also, ein shochtino, you also don't shecht a koi on Yom Tov. So in that sense, it's chaya. But if you did go ahead and shecht it anyway, ein mechasin tamo, then you don't do kisui adam. Because why? Because maybe it's not maybe it's not a chaya. V'chelbo metamei b'tumat nevera k'chayav, tumato b'sfeik, ve'in po din po peter chamor. Okay, so we don't actually have to go through all the pratim, as fascinating as they are. I don't want to get too locked up here, but let's look at the next part. Ketzad shaveh lebehema, chelbo asur kechelev behema. So the chelev of a koi is asur like the chelev of a behema. Ve'ein chayavin alav karet, but you're not chayav karet for it. So in that sense, the koi legabe chelev is like chatzi shiur legabe chelev. That in both cases, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's an isur, but there's no chiyuv karet. I think, yeah, we'll leave the rest. So the Gemara elsewhere, when it discusses koi, as I say, there's a machloket tanaim about the nature of koi. Is koi a safek behema, a safek ya, or is it a briya bifnei atzmo? Is its own category? We'll just take a quick look here at the Bar Tanura. Koi nechleku bo chachmei Yisrael. Right? The chachamim, in other words, the chachmei Amish had a machloket. Yesh omrim shu habar. Some people say it's a wild sheep. Yesh omrim shu tayish haba min hatzviya. Some people say it's a tayish that was born of a tzviya. In other words, it was born of a pairing of a wild animal with a domesticated animal. And some people say it's a being all unto itself. And the Chachamim were not machri. So bear in mind that when we talk about koi, we have this in mind. Koi is either safek chaya, safek behema, and we just don't know, or it's not a safek. We know that it's neither a chaya or a behema. It's just a briya bifnei atzma. So let's plug that into the sugya here. Yeah. So again, Rabbi Yochanan, who holds chatzi shiur as asur min haTorah, he says, okay, let's look at the cases here. We're going to start from the premise that kol sheyeshno ba'onesh sheyeshno ba'azra. Let's start from the premise that anything the Torah says you have a chiyuv karet for, the Torah also warned you explicitly not to do it. That is, the Torah said it's asur, and you also get karet. So koi batzi shiur hawil ve'eno ba'onesh yachol eno ba'azhara. So maybe you'll argue then that since koi, as we see in the Mishnah, if you eat the chelev of a koi, you're not chayav karet. If you eat a chatzi shiur of chelev, you're not chayav karet. So koi v'chatzi shiur ha'il ve'eno ba'onesh yachol eno ba'azhara. So maybe you'll say, just like the Torah excluded them from onesh karet, the Torah excluded them from the isur altogether. Actually, mina Torah, you would be allowed to eat the chelev of a koi, and you would be allowed to eat chatzi shiur of chelev. But mudamar kol chelev. But the Torah says explicitly kol chelev. Any chelev is not allowed. So the Torah excludes chatzi shiur, according to the way Rabbi Yochanan is learning here, explicitly. The Torah is telling me kol chelev. You don't allowed to eat any chelev. And so, what's he proving to Reish Lakish? What's he trying to prove, and what is he proving?
The kol chelev is saying that all chelev, even a chetzi shiur, is a sur, and even though there was no warning, it's still a sore.
Well, or actually, no, there is a warning, but there's no onesh, right? Kol chelev lo tochelu. Kol chelev shuv kesef is lo tochelu. So you might have thought that there is no warning, but I'll tell you, there is a warning. Once there's a warning, I understand that the Torah is saying it's asur. So he's saying to Reish Lakish, you want to say Chatzi shiur mutar min Torah, but here I'll show you the example of chelev that the Torah forbids Chatzi shiur of chelev, and I can presumably I'll derive from that for any time that the Torah says there's an azhara for something, that means that'll include Chatzi shiur. So Rabbi Reish Lakish answer says no, midurabanan. He says I still hold that the isur of chelev of Chatzi Shelev and Chelev Koi is an Isur Durabanan. Ukra Asmachta Ba'alma. The Kra is just an Asmachta. And then the Gemara presumably defends this answer of Reish Lakish and says, Achri Nami Mistabra. This is also reasonable. This also makes sense. Why? Di Salkadatach Doraita. Because if you'll say that Chatzi Shiur is an Isur Dioraita, then you also have to say that Koi is an Isur Dioraita. The Chedeb of a Koi is Asur Dioraita. But that will be problematic because Koi, Sfeikahu. Koi, it's a Safek. In other words, we don't know if it's a behema, and then its chelev is asur, or if it's a chaya, and then its chelev would be mutar. Do I need a pasuk to add in for me a safek? In other words, it's not reasonable to think Torah went out of its way with the pasuk of kol chelev. Wait, let me step. According to Rabbi Yochanan now, words kol chelev mean any chelev, and that will come to include even less than a shiur. It'll also include the chelev of a koi. That's how Rabbi Yochanan understands kol chelev. So Reish Lakish pushes back and he says, no, it's not going to, what you're saying doesn't make sense. Because if it was only the Chatzi Shiur problem, naniach, like Mela, we could accept that perhaps. But you can't accept it for Koi. Koi, why is Koi not Anush Karet? Because it's a Safek. So when I read the Pasuk of Kol Chelev, now you, Rabbi Yochanan, want to say that Kol Chelev comes to include the Safek of Koi, would not give me a pasuk because of my doubt. In other words, when I say that koi is a safek behema, safek chaya, that means we human beings, we don't know how to categorize it. But the Kadosh Baruch Hu knows how to categorize it. He just didn't tell us. The safek is entirely our safek. So it doesn't make sense that the Torah would come to include something about which I happen to be in doubt about. It makes sense for the Torah to define Isurim in an absolute way, in a clear and absolute way. The Torah has no safek koi. We have the safek about koi. So it doesn't mean that kol chelev comes to include the chelev of a koi, because that's my safek. So just like it's not going to include the safek of koi, it doesn't really include chatzi shiur. Not because chatzi shiur is a safek, but because I now no longer have to say that kol chelev means any chelev. So let's take a moment and look at Rashi here. So Rashi says, "Enli elish sheyeshno ba'onesh yeshno ba'azhara." So this is Rabbi Yochanan's kasha to Reish Lakish. I don't have anything that's included with onesh. Anything that has an onesh is something that the Torah also gave me a warning about. And Rashi explains, "Gabe chelev kai." It's referring here to the Isur of chelev. Don shov azharato smuchim ze lezeh. It's punishment and it's azhara close to one another, as we saw in the psukim. Rashi is going to quote the psukim. Kol chelev shuvah chesed be'ez lo tochelu arei azhara. So that was the first pasuk of Gimel. There, the Torah gives us the azhara. You're not allowed to eat chelev. Samich le in psukim down it says, "Ki kol ochel chelev min behema v'nichrita." Hare onesh. So I see from this the next pasuk, or pasuk of Hey, I understand what the onesh is. The onesh is karet. So Rashi explains, "Ainly sheyehem uzhar ela al shiur shehu anush alav karet." So now it stands to reason that the only thing that the Torah warned me about is eating a shiur of chelev, for which I would be chayav karet. So since the Torah first gives me an azhara not to eat chelev, and then it says if you eat chelev, you're chayav karet, so it stands to reason that kol sheyeshno ba'onesh yeshno ba'azhara. And I could say that it's a closed system. Anything that the Torah told me I'm anush karet for, that's what it was warning me about. The gabe onesh lo ktiv kol achelev ela aochel tichti kol ochel chelev. So just to clarify, so Rashi is making an important point. One second. What happened to my Rashi? Here it is, or my pasuk. So when we start off, when we look at the onesh, in other words, we start off, we did psukim in order. So the first pasuk that we came to was the azhara, and then we came to the onesh. So what's the onesh for? Ki kol ochel chelev. The onesh is for eating chelev, and we know the definition for eating is eating a shiur. The kol in this pasuk doesn't go on the chelev, it's modifying the person who's eating. Kol ochel chelev, anyone who eats chelev. So it's referring to anyone who would eat a shiur of chelev. Anyone who eats, anyone who did achila of chelev, he will be chayav karet. Right. So in the pasuk of the onesh, the word kol only refers to the one who was eating. And since it's talking about eating, I understand it means somebody who's eating shiur. So let's read through the Rashi again quickly and pull it all together. Ainli sheyeshno ba'onesh yeshno ba'azhara gabe chelev kai. Right. So Rabbi Yochanan's talking about chelev, that the onesh and the azhara are brought close to one another. The Torah says kol chelev shor v'chesed ve'ez lo tochelu. That's the azhara, and then close to it says ki kol ochel chelev min habehema. Anyone who eats chelev from the behema is chayav karet. That's the onesh. So ein sheyehei muzhar ela al kashiur shuhu anush alav karet. So then I would say, all that I would get from that, the most I could say, the Torah warns against, that there's forbade anyone who eats a shiur of chelev, that he would be chayav karet. And what's the diuk here? The gabe onesh lo ktiv kol achelev, because when it tells me the onesh karet, it does any chaylev. If you eat any chaylev, it just says anyone who eats chaylev, and achila is always going to be a kashiur. Reish Lakish is doche. He pushes this kasha away, and he says, it's a very nice drasha you have, but it's an asmachta ba'alma. And then the Gemara, either Reish Lakish or more likely the Gemara defends. It says Achinami Mistabra. The idea that the chaylev of a koi and the chaylev of chatzi shiur, it makes sense that it makes sense that it would only be an isur d'Rabbanan. If you would think that the isur of chatzi shiur and the isur of koi is dioraita, and you want to include it in the azhara of kol chaylev, the koi is a safek. Rashi says koi shehu safek ve'ein bo kareh v'chatzi shiur she'eino ba'onesh minayin shehu ba'ala. Where would I know that they're included in the azhara? Actually, this is back on Rabbi Yochanan. I read a little bit too. I read it out of order. Rashi, this Rashi here and the next Rashi are still explaining Rabbi Yochanan, right? So Rabbi Yochanan says, "Ein li'el kol sheyesh ba'onesh yesh ba'asara koi b'chatzi shiur ha'oil ve'eino ba'onesh koi shu safek ve'ein bo karei koi is a safek behema safek chaya and it's not chayav karei." Shiur also a no ba'onesh. Those are things that the Torah doesn't punish you karet for. Minayin shu baz, where will I know that they're forbidden, that the Torah warned eating them? Talmud lomar kol chaylev lo tochelu, v'hacha ktiv kol achaylev, klomar afilu kol shu. And here by the azhara, it goes not on the ochel, it goes on the chaylev. And that, so I understand here, kol would mean any chaylev, even a kol shu, even a little bit, meaning even a chatzi shiur. So then Reish Lakish pushes back, no, that's a smachta ma'alma, and it makes sense to say that it's an asmachta, because koi is a safek, dafka, because the tzad that you want to prove from koi doesn't make sense. Koi is a safek, but it's a safek. It's a safek klape shmaya. It's not a safek to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's our safek. We don't know. There's no reason to believe is going to say kol chaylev to include something about which we have a doubt. Something that we can't be machriya. Rashi says, "Atakra lebruye sveka bitmiya," right? As a rhetorical question, would the Torah come to include something that's a safek? Atu kame shmaya svekahu ibehemahavi yahavi? Do you think that it's a safek to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, whether the koi is a behema or a chaya? The Kadosh Baruch Hu knows. It's just we don't know. So when the Torah, when God writes, when He gives it to us, and He says kol chaylev, obviously it can't refer to chaylev of a koi per se. In other words, it's not coming to include something for which we have a safek. Koi is either in this understanding. Koi is a safek. It's a safek chaya, safek behema. It means the Kadosh Baruch Hu knows if it has the dinim of a chaya or has the dinim behema, and we just don't know. And since we don't, so then we saw, like the Mishnah in Bikurim, that we're going to treat it some ways like a chaya, in some ways like a behema, in some ways like neither, and in some ways like both. So Adkan, we see Reish Lakish I'm sorry, Rabbi Yochanan holds Chatzi Shur is Asur Min Torah. Reish Lakish holds Chatzi Shur is Mutar Min Torah. And Rabbi Yochanan wants to prove to Reish Lakish that Chatzi Shur is Asur Min Torah, because after all, the Torah says Kol Chelev. Any Chelev is Asur. And so that must mean that the Torah is Mazhira, on Afilu Chatzi Shur. And Reish Lakish says, no, it's just an asmachta. And in fact, your proof isn't such a good proof because you include koi, so it can't include koi. Because koi is a safek, and I wouldn't use a pasuk to tell me something about a safek. We're going to go on a little bit. I have a feeling that we're going to go over this next part again next week, because I feel like this is a lot of information in one shiur. But let's push on, and we'll put in the next part. So the Gemara now pushes back. Yes.
How can there be a machloket if there is a safek? Usually Chazal, when they do halacha, they put a gader misaviv, because they say maybe people are not, there could be a safek, and maybe they, to be sure, so let's put a gader that they wouldn't fall into this issur. And here there are two rabbis who are discussing if it's a safek or not. That's very strange. If it's a safek, so we shouldn't allow it. Whatever one of the rabbis says that it is still allowed, and the other one says it's not allowed.
So let me say a couple of
maybe it's not very clear.
No. So the thing is, I want to clarify, because this question of the koi being safek, it's you're asking a good question. It's important for us to try to now let me refine this a little bit. So first of all, the idea of gzerot midrabanan is generally not mishum safek, right? It's like what you said.
No, it's not a safek from the point of view of the halacha, but maybe the people who should follow the halacha, maybe they don't understand it.
Okay, so let's differentiate though. When we talk about koi being safek chaya, safek behema, so that means that there's a safek in the reality, right? If there's a safek, when I look at this animal, I don't know if it's a chaya, I don't know if it's a behema. So that's outside that koi is a safek. Actually, and I'm not sure if this is part of your question.
Today, a rabbi would say, אני מחמיר. אני לא יודע, אני מחמיר.
Unfortunately, we see that all too often, even though, the Gemara says in certain that there's a basis to say kochet ba'adiv, that in many instances we say that the strength of heter is stronger than chumrah. Or to put it, I saw this with the Aruch HaShulchan, who puts it this way: before the Torah, there were no Isurim. Okay, let's say from the time of Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, there's certain Isurim, but anything that's not included in the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the Torah allowed you to do. So then the Torah comes and says to the Jews, you're not allowed to do X, Y, Z. We're going to give you a whole lot of, okay. So
that's the bechira.
Yeah, so right, and we chose that, right? That's
no, I don't know. We chose, but maybe the Kadosh Baruch chose.
Well, like we said a few weeks ago, right? Even though we don't remember it, we all took an oath at Sinai, Zel. But what's the point? So the Torah comes and says, these things are asur. So now what will I say? Okay, but anything that the Torah didn't say is asur must be mutar. In the same way that I said after the Sheva Mitzvot B'nei Noach, anything that wasn't included Sheva Mitzvot B'nei Noach, ze mutar, as yesh lomar gam ken acharei matan Torah. Anything the Torah didn't say is asur must be mutar. So in other words, that's part of this idea of kocha de hetera, that the Torah goes out of its way to tell me things that are asur. So if the Torah didn't go out of its way to tell me asur, who am I to say that it's asur? It's not for me to say that something's asur where the Torah didn't say it's asur. Now, in terms of gzerot midrabanan, that goes into what you said. So there's an idea, though, that Chazal say that, okay, there are cases where we don't want you to be over on Yisur Torah. So we will tell you that Ad Kan is mutar. In other words, I'm going to pull back. I'm going to limit the heter, and I'll say Ad Kan. That's so that, God forbid, if you're over on Ag Zeira, but you'll still not be over on the Isur Torah. So that's the Gader, right? Like Gader Torah. Seder. Well, Zelo Mishum Safek. In other words, it's not, if there's a safek at all, so maybe you'll say there's a safek regarding human nature, but it's not because I have a specific safek about the reality of that halacha. So, to take an example, so according to Chazal, to take something from a Reshut Yachid to Reshut Rabim on Shabbat, that's an Isur Torah. But to take something from a Reshut Yachid to a Karmelit, or in other words, or to a Makom Patur, which is neither a Reshut Yachid nor is it a Reshut Rabim, but it's another kind of Reshut. The Torah permits that, but because the Karmelit is like, it has aspects that are like a Reshut, so Chazal say, we need to do that, because if we allow you to take things from the Reshut Yachid into the Karmelit, then you'll come to take from the Reshut Yachid into Reshut Rabim. And it's not because we don't know what a Karmelit is, we know what a Karmelit is. We have a definition for it. In fact, it's neither Reshut Rabim nor is it Reshut Yachid. When I come to Koi, so Koi, though, is an interesting case because there's a machloket about whether or not it's a fake. So this is what we saw in the Bartanura on Bikurim, right? That according to some Chachamim, it's a safek behema, safek chaya. And according to Chachamim, it's neither a chaya nor is it a behema, it's a bria bifnei atzma. So according to that daya, it's not a safek at all. But according to the first daya, the nature of koi itself is a safek. That is, we as human beings, we as Chazal, we don't know how to categorize it. So you'll notice in that machloket, no one says, there isn't a machloket where one person says koi is a behemah. No, actually, nobody says that in this sense, it's kind of like the Karmelit, in the sense that the Karmelit is the Reshut Rabim, nor is it Reshut Yachid. It's a separate Reshut altogether. So the same thing, Koi, everybody knows that it's not clearly a Beheman, it's not clearly a Chaya. But so on al tzad zeh, that it's not clearly one or the other. So some of Chazal said we don't know if it's a behema or if it's a chaya. So it's a safek chaya, safek behema. But other chachamim said no. We know that it is neither a chaya nor a behema. It's a bria bifnei atzma. So that's the name of the safek is altogether. I don't want to say it's unique, but it's different, right? It's a different kind of safek. So when I can have a sveka dioraita. So like what would be a sveka dioraita? Might be, well, take an example. We're talking about chalev. So the Torah says, you're not allowed to eat chalev behema, but you're allowed to eat shuman behema. When I take them out of the animal and I put them side by side, they're virtually indistinguishable. So let's say I have a slab of shuman and I have a slab of chalev, and I eat one, and now I don't know if I ate the chalev or if I ate the shuman. So it's a safek dioraita. That is, there's a safek. Maybe I ate something that was asur midioraita. It's not a safek because I didn't know that was shuman, and or it wasn't known in the world that this is shuman and this is chalev. It was known. It's now I don't know. I ate one of them, and now I don't know which one I ate. That's a safek dioraita, but it's not a safek about the reality per se. It's my safek. I don't know the reality anymore. In that sense, koi. Oh, Michael, koi is like, according to the tzad that koi is safek chaya, safek behema. It's like a permanent safek. It's something that we'll never know. So it's something to think about. So, Michael Werner, thanks for joining us. We're just about to do a few lines, and I said we're going to do the next few lines, and I think we're going to probably do them again. And I hope you'll have time to go back and listen to the beginning of the shiur, because we introduced a lot of material here in these few lines. But before we go on to the next few lines, now I'm going to do a very quick recap so that we'll understand what we're going into. So the quick recap is as follows. Rabbi Yochanan says Chatzi Shiur is asur min Torah. Reish Lakish says Chatzi Shiur is mutar min Torah. And now, and each of them gave their reasons, right? So this is something that we're getting into. What are the conceptual underpinnings for each of their reasons, for each of their piskei halacha? So Rabbi Yochanan, so Paul or Michael Schwartz, according to Rabbi Yochanan, when he gives his reasons, what is his reason that Chatzi Shiur is asur min Torah? What's his initial reason?
Because it can be, in order to have a shiur, you have to have a chetzi shiur.
Right. So because it's fit to be combined with another chetzi shiur or more of that shiur until you get to a shiur. And so, in other words, before you can eat a shiur, you're going to have to eat less than a shiur. So as soon as you start eating less than a shiur, you're eating something which in potentia is already asur now. So it's asur. That's the reason it's asur min Torah. And Reish Lakish says no. The Torah forbids eating, and eating is defined as eating a shiur. So anytime you're eating less than a shiur, you haven't done something that the Torah forbade. That's the way they lay out their machloket. Now, Rabbi Yochanan asks a kasha on Reish Lakish. So for the moment, it seems like Rabbi Yochanan is setting aside his reasoning, and he wants to prove his case to Reish Lakish from a pasuk. So he says, look, the Torah says you're not allowed to eat chalev of a behema, and if you eat chalev of a behema, then you're chayav karet. So he says, "Ein li el kol sheyesh no ba'onish yesh azhara. I only have a case where chaylev, which is categorized as something that is being chayav karet, is something that the Torah also forbade. Yeshno ba'azhara. The Torah warned me against eating it. So a koi and a chatzi shiur, since I know that they're not included in the onish karet, then I might think that the Torah also didn't warn against eating them. But Talmud Lamar, but the Torah is kol chelev. The Torah in its azhara says you're not allowed to eat any chelev. So what's the any? Is the kol? So that's going to come to include a chatzi shiur. Torah is telling me you're not allowed to eat a chatzi shiur. And it's also telling me, according to this, not allowed to eat even a shiur of chelev of a koi, even though you won't be chayav karet for eating. So Reish Lakish pushes back and says midrabanan ukra asmachta ba'alma. He says it's not really a proof. The pasuk that you're bringing is just an asmachta, and the surah is only an isur drabanan. And hachinami mistabra. And this idea that it's that the chatzi shiur and the koi are only chelev chatzi shiur chelev, and the chelev of the koi are asurimi drabanan makes sense because koi is a safek. In other words, I don't know if koi is a behemah, and therefore its chelev is asur, or if it's a chaya, and therefore its chelev is mutar. So koi sveikahu. Do I need a pasuk to tell me a safek? That is, it doesn't make sense that kol chelev is going to come and tell me something that the Torah is going to tell me not to eat the chelev of a koi because I have a doubt about whether it's a behemah or chaya. The Torah knows whether it's a chaya or behemah, so it's not going to bring a special pasuk to tell me something about which it has no safek. The safek is wholly mine, so it doesn't make sense that kol chelev can refer to the chelev of a koi. So just like it doesn't refer to the chelev of a koi, I'll tell you, it doesn't refer to chatzi shiur of any chelev. So actually like I say, I think we're going to stop there, but I'll read the next part, and then we'll go through it next time. So now, at this point, so we had Rabbi Yochanan asks the kasha and Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish pushes back. Rabbi Yochanan wants to prove that chatzi shiur is asur min Torah from the pasuk of kol chelev. Reish Lakish pushes back and says, no, it's only isur d'Rabbanan. And I'll prove it to you because koi is a safek, and I don't need the pasuk. Not just that I don't need. It doesn't make sense that kol chelev would be there to tell me about the safek of koi. So the Gemara says, "Imishum ha lo irya." So now we'll say back to Reish Lakish, if that's your objection, that kol chelev can't refer to a koi, lo irya, that doesn't teach me anything. In other words, it's not a proof. Kasai koi bria bifnei atzmai, because I'll tell you that the one who says that kol chelev refers to koi doesn't think that koi is a safek. They think that koi is bria bifnei atzma, that it's neither behema nor a chaya. And so if that's true, then it makes sense to say that I need a special pasuk to tell me that its chelev is because it won't be categorized under the isur of behema, and it won't be categorized under the heter of chaya. So I need the Torah to come and tell me kol chelev. Because if you don't say that way, Hadama Ravidi Baravin, this which Ravidi Baravin says, Af kol latuye koi, that kol comes to include a koi. There, and this is why we're not going to we'll get into this next week. The proof they're going to bring is also koi, but not koi regarding chelev, regarding dam. So we saw in this parsha that there's an isur of eating chelev, there's an isur of eating dam. The Gemara here is quoting from a sugya Masechet Kritot, where they're talking about dam, and we'll go a bit more next time. But the Gemara wants to say, no, that I can understand kol chelev is telling me about koi, but not because koi is a safek. It's telling me about koi because koi is bria b'fnei atzma, because it's its own special category. Because if you don't say that, that which Ravidi Baravin said, that kol comes to include koi, the koi svekahu, yitzricha krali rebuye sveka. If koi is a safek, do I need a pasuk to include a safek? Ela bria shami. Rather, a creation, or it's a being, is different. Meaning, a bria b'fnei atzma, a category unto itself is different. That's true of what Ravidi Baravin is saying. Be'hachanami bria shami, and here also bechelev bria shami. The category of kol, which is a bria b'fnei atzma, is different. In other words, it's different than a safek, and it's different, and so I need to have a pasuk for it itself. Okay, that's just quick translation of that, and we'll pick up on that next time, and then I think we'll get through that, and then we'll go on. That will end our discussion of Chatzi Shiur, and then the Gemara go on into defining Inuyim. How do I know what an Inui is and what it includes and so forth? But I'm thinking next week when we finish that, so we may take a little bit of time and see what poskim say about Chatzi Shiur on Yom Kippur. I think that might be a fitting way to move on. But that's it for tonight. Okay, any questions or comments? No. Okay, good. All right, everybody, get some rest.
Thank you.
So, see you next week. Bye-bye.